I am shocked I have never seen this mentioned on X or really at all online, but there are ruins in Montana that are really out of place. The area is/was guarded by the US military/black trucks claiming that the site is a missile site, but in reality, the locals all know what is there. I will green text my experience the one time we went hiking and didn't encounter any G-men. Be 14 years old, living in Billings, grandparents live in Yaak, Montana. One summer during the second Bush administration, my parents sent me up to Yaak to spend some weeks with my grandparents and cousins. The first few days it's rough going on my grandparents' farm, dealing with basically living off the grid, no Game Boy and no Xbox. My cousins were older and treated me fine, but the chores midsummer made me exhausted and stressed. One day my cousins asked me if I wanted to go four-wheeling with them and my grandpa. I agreed, and we head off in two trucks with the ATVs in the trailer, headed northwest. I forget how long we traveled, but we eventually arrived to the trailhead. My three cousins and Grandpa all had ATVs. I had to ride bitch with my cousin Simon. Grandpa told us assertively to stay on the trails as there were grizzlies in the area foraging, but they tend to stay away from the trails due to the noise. We set out, the four of us, with Grandpa at the lead. I remember how beautiful everything was heading down the trails. After a few hours, we stopped at a small lake and had lunch, laughing and joking. In the distance, we could see Garber Mountain. Grandpa told us about the secret military base hidden in the mountain. As a kid, I thought of games like Halo, full of super soldiers fighting aliens. Cousins were enamored by the idea. Grandpa warned them of the black helicopters and vans that arrested people getting too close. My cousins agreed to not head in that direction, but I knew they were lying. We packed up and set off to head back to trucks. Grandpa again in the lead. About an hour into the drive, I realized my cousins aren't following Grandpa and heading towards the mountain. I yelled to Simon, asking him if this was a good idea. He reassured me it would be great. Eventually, we hit a fence with some warning signs telling us to stay out. We traveled for about 20 more minutes through some thick forest until we reached a break in the fence. The break was big enough to ride through. I remember the screech of the fencing against the sides of the four-wheelers. We traveled down the valley for a bit as a river ran near the mountain. Eventually we see columns next to trees, old ones that kinda looked Egyptian. We stopped and got on foot looking around, realizing we passed a large ruined building. We start exploring the grounds. There were carvings of bird people everywhere. They were simple and looked like humans with bird heads and long legs. Other carvings included circles and triangles and odd patterns. My cousins were laughing about how awesome this all was, and they felt like Indiana Jones. We approached the main building and it was massive but overgrown. There were old boxes everywhere with army stuff stamped all on the outside, and rusted generators and equipment in the center. I was nervous. I wanted to leave, but my cousins continued on into the main building. More bird people carvings everywhere and a massive stone pillar in the center. At that point, we hear a helicopter echoing through the valley. My cousins joke that it's the men in black and we should run. This freaked me out and I started crying as we ran back to the ATVs. We peeled out of the site and headed back towards the hole in the fence. My cousins were laughing while I was crying. Waiting for us at the hole were two big black SUVs, which I thought was odd considering how thick the forest was. Overhead I could hear helicopters. It sounded like more than one. The guys waiting had guns drawn and were wearing normal clothes like the operator guy from the K-memes. They arrested us and brought us to a ranger station where we stayed for a day in a small cabin attached to the building. My cousins were freaked out and asked for help, but every time they were told to shut up by the men outside the door. Eventually my grandpa showed up and told us we were all going home. No one spoke to us as we left. The ATVs were gone and the other truck we drove was gone too. My grandpa said they took them and never to talk about this again. The entire drive home was quiet. When we got to my grandparents, my grandma was crying and hugged us. They told us to never talk about this to anyone, and if anyone asked, we broke down in the woods and Grandpa rescued us. We never talked about it with each other and my grandparents, and certainly never to my parents. About a year later in school, I overheard someone talking to another kid about the hidden temple in the Kootenai forest. I asked him about it, and he recounted a story about how his dad and grandpa found the same place while hunting one winter. The kid described things perfectly. Fearing the government guys, I told him to never talk about it. Even now I am a bit uneasy discussing this. I'm not sure if anyone else has ever been up there. I tried using Google Earth and other providers to try and find it, but with no luck. I'm not sure if the trees cover everything up or if the government edits things like that out. Similarly, searching online pulls up nothing. I'll never forget the birdmen carvings and all the odd shapes carved into the weathered rock. Live in an extremely old house. 3 stories including the attic. No one ever goes into the attic. Hasn't been opened in about 10 years. I sleep in a room that is under the end of the attic. Every night I would hear thumps coming from upstairs, like someone was walking around or stomping. They were muffled, but I could hear them. Never think much of it. Figure it's a heater kicking on or something until a few years pass. We took all the carpet out of the attic so it was bare wood floors. While it was open, I decided to go up and check out what's over my room. There was a noticeable indentation over the portion of carpet that is above my room. It's in the shape of 2 half circles that come to points, and about the size of my hand. After they ripped the carpet up to reveal the flooring that's over my room, we found a ritual circle, pentagram with around 80 symbols surrounding it, all carved into the wood with dried blood and candle wax on each one. Now I'm really freaked out. All those years I've been hearing an actual thing stomp. After a few nights the thumps came back. This time, instead of a muffled thump, it was obvious something hard was banging on the wood floor. Sounds like hooves clopping on a patio. After they removed the ritual circle, they stopped for good. Still wonder what would have happened if I actually went upstairs during the stomps. My family had been vacationing in Moffat, Quebec since the 80s and at other lakes since the 70s. When they finally got to Lake Simard, they fell in love with the area and we have been going there ever since. It had a logging bridge that got half burned down at some point before we started going there. Teenagers would light their backs on fire with gasoline and jump off the bridge, which led to the bridge burning down, or so the story goes. The bridge recently burned down completely. People think it was one of the new property owners that built cabins near the bridge and got tired of people going on the bridge. Well, in the early 90s, my dad saw something on the lake one night while he was fishing alone, and when asked, insisted it was true the rest of his life. Dad goes fishing alone one evening all the way to the big lake. On his tiny fishing boat, it takes close to an hour to get there. He stays later than he should with no running lights. 90s and no game wardens this far, so who gives a fuck? Decide to start heading home because the lake is pitch black at night with no cabins or homes this far out. As he starts on his way back, he notices a light behind him. Shit, game warden about to BTFO dad. Not game warden, but a boat that is on fire. What the fuck is that? Gets spooked and starts heading back as fast as he can. Slow piece of shit boat. Burning boat keeps pace behind him, but maintains distance. Every time my dad stops, so does the burning boat. If my dad slows down, so does the boat. Dad is getting closer to camp and the boat keeps following. Dad goes past Old Bridge and looks behind him. Burning boat is gone. Never sees it again, but insists the story is true. We eventually just called it the ghost boat. As far as we know, my dad is the only one that ever saw it. I asked my mom after he died if he just made it up for us kids. Mom says he believed he saw something that night.